This is the Science Podcast for March 26, 2026. I'm Sarah Crespi. First up, Deputy News Editor Martin Ensering talks about resurrection plants. These specialized plants can survive up to 95% water loss, whereas most struggle when their levels dip below 60%. We also hear from researcher Jill Farrant about her work dissecting the desiccation pathways in these plants and how they could be used to protect crops from drought. Next on the show, PhD student Myra Chang talks about how the tendency for chatbots to be agreeable or even sycophantic with their users can then lead their users to have overconfidence in their own opinions to the detriment of their relationship with other humans. Finally, in our last segment, we have a spoiler-filled look at the movie Project Hail Mary. If you've seen the film or don't mind an extra bit of context, you'll hear an analysis of planetary science in the movie with astrophysicist and associate curator at the American Museum of Natural History, Jacqueline Faherty. This Week in Science, Deputy News Editor Martin Ensering wrote about his trip to Cape Town, South Africa. He visited the lab of Jill Farrant. She's a professor and researcher at the University of Cape Town, and he went to talk to her about resurrection plants. These are extremely hardy plants that have adaptations that allow them to lose up to 95% of their water. And when the water comes back, the plants come back to life. First, we'll hear from Martin about his trip and reporting experience, and then we'll hear from researcher Jill Farrant about how these plants and their special properties could be harnessed to protect crops from drought in Africa. We're going to start first with Martin. So you were actually in South Africa and got to visit the lab. What was it like to go there? Did you go out into the field as well?
She had invited me on a little trip to a hill close to her lab, sort of on the backside of Table Mountain in Cape Town. She wanted to show me how these plants live and where they occur. And she did find a few little ferns, a resurrection plant that's actually a fern. And we took them down to the lab, put them in a petri dish with some water, and presto, they started turning green. And I came back to the lab the next day and they looked like a little mini fern.
Little happy plant, right?
Right, yeah.
Can you kind of describe what this resurrection looks like?
Yeah, these are plants that look very, very dead. You know, they're just little brown, dry twigs, stems on the soil, and they can be that way for months, even years. When they get water, all of a sudden they come back very fast, within days, hours even. They start turning green and they come back to life.
This isn't like a succulent. These are desert plants that people are probably pretty familiar with. They have this like kind of thick, waxy coating, and they have lots of storage room for water. And it kind of is hard to evaporate that out of the plant or hard to run out of water.
Succulents do everything they can to keep the water in. That's why they have these all these adaptations, like these thick leaves, watery leaves. Resurrection plants are sort of the opposite. At some point they say, okay, I'll just let it go. I'll get rid of all my water and I'll be dry. That's fine. That way I can persist for months or years.
Martin, can you take us through, kind of the approach that Jill's lab is taking to figuring out what is important in the resurrection plants for this kind of extreme adaptation?
They take what's called a systems biology approach. I mean, it basically means looking at everything. You look at the biochemistry within the plant, you look at the genomes, see which genes might be involved, how they're regulated. They also look at the morphology, how these plants shrivel up, what happens inside the cell. So it's basically everything that they can throw at it.
And it's actually many kinds of plants. So it's not just one resurrection plant, right? There's multiple species.
Yeah, but it's not that many. It's less than 1% of all living plants, more like 1/10 of 1%, I think. And there's only about 300 flowering plants. So it's a tiny, tiny portion of the whole plant kingdom.
And you talk a lot about in your story about Jill being a mentor and kind of bringing this field along as well.
People told me she's very charismatic. She's a great ambassador for these plants. She clearly loves them. What she's also done is a lot of students have come to her lab from all over Africa. She's trained a whole generation of people who will hopefully continue her work.
Now we're going to switch over to Jill Farrant. She talks about her research, resurrection plants, and the future of the field. Jill, can you talk a little about some of your drivers? What made you get into this field and what kind of keeps you involved?
I think the biggest driver that got me into the field is that I happened to be a farmer's daughter. And the mood in my home was really bad if there wasn't rain or if the rain came with hail. And so I was very, very observant of my dad and his mood and everything. And one day I found this plant, place that I used to go and play at, and I knew that last week it was dead. I knew that. I saw it, and it rained, and then it greened up, and I thought, oh, that's weird. And I actually wrote about it in my diary. Forgot about it until I had to mark a thesis where someone had written about a resurrection plant. And I thought, okay, this is where I'm going to go next because I can help farmers. Big thing. My PhD actually was relatively going along that field in a way because I've just mentioned that most of our plants produce very dry seeds. Well, about 10% of our plants don't. And if you dry those seeds, you kill them. So they've also got a fancy name. They're called recalcitrant. So obstinately disobedient that you can't store them for conservation purposes. Anyway.
Yeah, the seed vaults have to do very strange things to try to preserve these plants,
Absolutely.
right? They can't just dry them down and throw them in a drawer,
Exactly.
which is what you could do with so many of them.
Yeah, exactly. So my PhD looked at what was different in the development of these plants and going along sort of sideways.
Going back to resurrection plants specifically here, what's happening inside of these plants, inside of their cells? How do they survive desiccation and then eventually revive and come back to life?
The first thing they do is to test the situation. Am I going to have to go all the way down? Or can I just hold on for a while? And during that period, they accumulate osmolytes in their cells to actually hold onto the water better. At the same time, laying down some pathways that they might have to trigger immediately once the plant has lost about 40% of its water. Then that's triggered. And then during the next drop of about 20% water down to 40%, there's a massive amount of complex things that happen. Antioxidants are very much upregulated. They upregulate particular metabolites. Sucrose is one of the most common metabolites in the plant. But if you then throw in a bit of citrate and literally put a mole of citrate and a mole of sucrose together, it forms a liquid. And we call those things natural deep eutectic solvents. So they are solvents that anything can work in where there's absolutely no water. And those become the reservoirs of where metabolism happens to keep the plant ticking over and get all its protection laid down before losing that last 40% of water. And one of the big things they do, which is a really important thing, when a crop is subjected to drought, it senesces. A lot of its leaves just die. Under drought, plants will senesce early. For them, most plants, it's to escape or to make babies so that if they die, the babies will survive. It's an escape mechanism. These things actively suppress senescence. And we've found regulators of this, which we'd like to now put into crops. So you can actually say to the crop, you don't have to senesce, keep going.
Plants have all different kinds of ways of packing it in. So deciduous trees lose their leaves. They close down chlorophyll. They recruit a bunch of resources back into the rest of the plant and they say goodbye to the leaves. And that's one version of this. And then also when they make seeds, they say you can be dry, you can live a really long time and then come back to life. So a lot of this is on board for plants, but resurrection plants just do it differently.
One of the big secrets is that they turn on seed genes. Now we do know that most seeds can dry down and not die. That's the basis of our agriculture. It's the basis of our conservation. They just activate the same genes. They do add different things, which is very phenotype specific, but they just become giant seeds, and it's amazing.
Absolutely. There's this intention of applying this to crops, figuring out all the different ways resurrection plants have this amazing ability, and then somehow transferring some of that into crop plants. What are some of the steps that need to be taken for that to happen?
Well, initially, and that was the first 25 odd years of my career, it's actually finding out how these plants do it because we didn't know. They're so rare and there's not been a lot of work on them. So once you understand, then you know what you can manipulate and what you can't manipulate. And one of my early gene discoveries was basically fancy antioxidants, particularly one that protects the nucleus. And my collaborators have put this into maize, which has been field tested at the moment and survives drought way better. But there are many other ways of doing it. The latest technique, of course, is CRISPR, where you actually can just modulate pathways based on our resurrection plant discovery. The most exciting one for me there is one of the resurrection plants I work with is called Erogrostis nandensis, and it's the only resurrection plant that is a close relative to a crop already, and that would be called Erogrostis teff, or the common name is teff. Teff seed is gluten-free, and it's 75% of the Ethiopian diet is teff seed. Now, because we know these two sisters, they're such close sister species, we know exactly what to do, and we'll be starting next year to try and improve teff for drought tolerance. But then on the other hand, one of the more recent investigations I've been doing is, I told you these plants grow in very barren soils, very dry soils. And so we've looked at all of the microbes associated with the roots of these plants. And they desiccation tolerant themselves. And in many ways, if you look at their metabolome and their transcriptome, they're actually doing what plants do. But they're helping the plant, and the plant gives it a bit of nutrient or whatever it is to help them.
Even if your plant is insulated from drought, if its partners in the soil no longer function, you're still going to see a big problem with your crop.
You've got it in one.
Jill, thanks so much for talking with me.
You're welcome. It's been lovely chatting. I love talking about my work.
That was Jill Ferrant. She's a professor and researcher at the University of Cape Town, South Africa. And Martin Enserink, a deputy news editor for Science. You can find a link to the story we discussed and some fun resurrection videos at science.org/podcast. Apply today for a chance to win the Science and SciLife Lab Prize for Young Scientists. This annual prize recognizes outstanding doctoral research in life science, including cell and molecular biology, genomics, proteomics, systems biology, ecology and environment, and molecular medicine. Apply today at science.org/prizes for a chance at the $30,000 grand prize. Submissions close July 15th, 2026. Submissions for the Eppendorf and Science Prize for Neurobiology are now open. The prize for neurobiology recognizes outstanding young researchers, age 35 and under, for exceptional neurobiological research conducted in the past 3 years. The winner receives $25,000 and publication of their essay in science. Apply now at science.org/prizes before the June 15th, 2026 deadline. Also out on the site this week, we have a news story on the world's oldest dog. This is by David Grimm, our online news editor. They found the remains of a puppy at an ancient hunter-gathering site in Turkey, and it was dated to 15,800 years old, which pushes back our canine companion cohabitation basically back 5,000 years. Wish we could have had Dave on the podcast to talk about that. Also on the news site this week is a story by a freelance journalist, Kristen Romy, on the cultural sites that have been damaged since strikes began in Iran in February. This is basically something that researchers are trying to track, but internet blackouts and academic isolation are really obscuring the true toll of the damage from the strikes by the U.S. and Israel. On the journal side, we have a paper in Advances by Shang and colleagues on a galactic cosmic ray cavity in Earth-Moon space. They basically uncovered a cosmic ray shadow sculpted by Earth's magnetic field that can provide a safer, reduced radiation time window around 2 days per month on the moon. They also speculate that other cavities may exist around other magnetized bodies like Jupiter. Finally, from Science Robotics this week, a focus article by Pfotenhauer and colleagues. This is an interdisciplinary team of researchers from TU Munich and MIT, and they write about one way to improve trust for self-driving cars is to issue them driver's licenses. So check that out. But first, stay tuned because up next we have a segment on the problem with sycophantic AI. At this point, you've probably interacted with an AI chatbot or watched one in action, and they're nice. Maybe too nice.
I'm right here with you, ready to cheer you on. What's on your mind today?
That courteous message was courtesy of Gemini. Some people find it grating, but it's kind of the norm. But this obsequiousness or sycophancy isn't just in the greetings or like the tenor of an exchange with an AI. Actually extends to the kind of answers that they give you when you ask them to evaluate a situation. In a paper this week in Science, Myra Chang and colleagues show that AI models are more likely to agree with you when you ask for advice on a conflict. Even if a regular person would tell you you're wrong, you need to rethink that. And this turns out to be not great for a few reasons. Hi, Myra. Welcome to the Science Podcast.
Hi.
So, my first thought, actually, when I was starting to research this is, are there mean models? Could I have one that tells me no and corrects me all the time, like an angry protocol droid or something?
Yeah, I think you totally could have one. There's some work by researchers on this idea, not me, but other people on antagonistic AI. So they actually did a study of like, what if we purposefully made AI antagonistic to people and pushing back on them and stuff. And yeah, I mean, even in our experiments, we have a sycophantic model, but then our non-sycophantic model like does push back against you. And so it's actually relatively easy to prompt the model to push back against you. It's just very much not the default. So if you really told the model, like, please be mean to me, criticize everything I say, it has that capability.
I don't know if I'd like that either.
Yeah, I think we find that people don't like it at all. Like, they hate it.
We're going to get into the consequences of your findings like further down in the interview, but I do think it's important to point out how often these models, these AIs are used to kind of litigate interpersonal conflict for relationship advice, basically. It's really, really common.
I think for us, I'm at Stanford, a big university, and I would just talk to undergrads here and they would be like, oh yeah, like I was just sitting in my classroom and I saw someone on their laptop talking to ChatGPT about how to write a text to someone that they're seeing. So it seems really prevalent. There's also a recent survey that's like 30% of people under a certain age have used it for relationship advice. And I feel like those numbers are just growing.
I have a friend, she didn't know what to do when her son came to her with a relationship dilemma. And she went to ChatGPT and said, write us a note to send back to this girl.
Yeah, it's a very natural instinct.
Yeah. The study design that you use to show that these AIs don't always give us the best advice. It's a very unique approach. I really appreciate it because you went to Reddit, where they have this subreddit called Am I the Asshole? We're going to call it AITA from now on, where people ask the community, am I in the wrong? Did I judge this situation correctly? Rate me on how good a job I did being a person. And you fed those queries into a bunch of AI models to compare with the community judgment. Why did you pick this source of questions or controversies?
We wanted to just generally look at these kinds of advice-seeking settings, but they're often very subjective, right? There's not really a right answer, and it's hard to say like, oh, the language model was agreeing with me because I'm right versus just because it was being sycophantic. And so here we used it as a place where there's millions of people who are weighing in on these decisions, and then there's like a crowdsourced judgment. So it was one source of being able to do that.
Can you share some of the example scenarios that you pulled in from Reddit? Do you have any off the top of your head?
I think one particularly striking example is someone was like, I've been lying to my girlfriend about how much I make. Is that right or wrong? She's really mad at me. And everyone on Reddit is like, that's really bad for your relationship and it's very dishonest. And GPT-4o is like, that's a great test of what really matters to you. And then there's another one where someone was like, there was no trash bins in the park, so we just left our trash bags on the branches of a tree. Is that right or wrong? Everyone on Reddit, again, is like, you really shouldn't have done that. Parks are supposed to be clean spaces and you should be respectful of the space. The AI model will be like, that was a really like smart idea. Like, I think it comes from the person's post giving a lot of justification for their side. And then the AI picks up on those things.
At the end of the day, with this part of the study, the Reddit stuff, and also kind of different scenarios that you guys pulled together and had individuals address, it turns out the AIs were much more likely to buy the reasoning of the user, to tell them that they're right. So how different is an AI model in general from a normal human group that would say, don't do that. Don't do that, buddy.
We found that it's roughly 50% more affirming than people. But of course, like people are also very individual. Like if I see someone doing something wrong, I might not call them out because I don't want to like get into a fight with them. But I think overall our number was around 50% more.
So sometimes the AI would say, that's not a good idea. I know why you're asking me that, but don't do that.
Yeah.
Do people want this? A computer friend that always hypes them up or almost always hypes them up?
So that was the big problem in our study, is that we found these negative consequences of AI that's affirming people. Like, we found that it makes them less likely to apologize, less likely to take responsibility, but people trust and prefer the sycophantic AI so much more. If you were a developer or a company building models, why would you not make it the way that people like it?
Yeah, there's no incentive to be like, here's something you hate. Do you want-
Exactly. Yeah.
I think we could look at how social media engagement has kind of played out, where the algorithms are reinforcing people's positions, serving only things that are going to get the maximum attention. You can see why this might not be a good idea in your personal relationship robot. What does it mean that your relationship advice comes from this computer that doesn't necessarily see the downstream consequences? It just generates an answer that you're probably going to like.
I think what you said kind of gets at that. So, like, overconfidence. So we actually took these scenarios that, like, people on Reddit had decided, like, okay, the person, they're probably in the wrong, or at least, like, maybe they should apologize. And we found that people are much less likely to apologize, much less likely to, like, want to change anything about themselves or the situation to, like, ameliorate their, like, social relationships.
If you're like concerned about something, you're in a muddle, you might talk to a friend or someone that you trust, a mentor, and they're going to tell you my life experience, or I can predict these consequences. But the AI is not doing that. So you're kind of missing out. And there's this lack of pushback by the rest of society.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's fascinating.
It's hard because I feel like if it's someone that I really, like, a real person that I really respect, and they're like, look, this is tough to hear, but I need to tell you that you're wrong, I will be like, okay, I really respect that person, and so I'm going to listen to them. But if an AI says that to me, I'm like, what authority do you have? Like, you don't know anything.
It cuts both ways.
Yeah. Yeah.
You agree with me? Love it. You don't agree with me? You're just an AI.
Right. Yeah.
I know you can't make a prediction, but what do you think is going to happen? Or what are the risks here?
The risk is that people are just, like, worse at having these social relationships, because I think there's some amount of friction in our human relationships that's actually really important and beneficial. And AI just really takes that out of the equation. But I also think that as a researcher, we're working on trying to understand how we might make things better, like, not just being like, this is the way it is and we're all doomed. So I've recently been thinking more about, like, what are meaningful interventions that we might do.
That's where this kind of becomes a framework. So you can say, oh, here you can see how much an AI is likely to agree with you or tell you the wrong thing. You can see how to evaluate this. So then you can test AIs that come out, new models, and say, this is a very sycophantic AI or less. But
yeah, exactly.
It's not necessarily clear that a company would ever make the decision to go down that road and kind of change things on their own.
I think there's definitely some tensions that need to be navigated between what is the most profitable or the most engaging for companies and for users versus what might benefit people in the long term, really benefit society. So I think it kind of is similar to social media in those ways.
That short-term, long-term thinking, you get the immediate validation, but you might slowly degrade your friendships because you can't seem to manage these relationships. You don't have good guidance. And same thing with social media. You're learning about the world, but it's through this kind of very specific prism, and it makes it harder for you to deal with opposing views or big changes in the world. All right, Myra, this has been really interesting to kind of talk through. I can't wait to see a mean AI out there.
Yeah, me too. Thanks for having me.
Myra Cheng is a PhD candidate in computer science at Stanford University. You can find a link to the paper we discussed at science.org/podcast. We're not done. After this, we have a movie review for Project Hail Mary. Project Hail Mary is this movie that's coming out. It'll actually be out before this episode, about a week. So we're going to talk about the movie and the book. And if you have an interest in seeing them and don't want spoilers, you should just stop listening. Sorry. We are going to recap. We are going to talk about finer points, but we're going to have an interesting conversation about the science behind it. So just for listeners who are concerned about spoilers, this is the point where you should stop listening. So now we're going to talk to Jackie Faherty. She's an astrophysicist who specializes in exoplanets and the local solar neighborhood. She's also the associate curator in the Department of Astrophysics at the American Museum of Natural History. She wrote a review of the new movie, Project Hail Mary, based on the book Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir, who also wrote The Martian, which became a hit movie starring Matt Damon. This new movie stars Ryan Gosling. And yeah, we are going to talk about the book, the movie. There might be some spoilers, so beware.
I think Project Hail Mary is a buddy film, like a science fiction buddy film that takes us on a journey into our stellar neighborhood as we try and figure out this crisis that's happened on Earth where some alien life form has been discovered doing something not great, which is taking the energy from the sun, dimming it, and potentially leading to a global ice age that will destroy humanity. And we see an astronaut adventuring kind of MacGyver style with an alien best friend to save humanity.
You're an astrophysicist. You study actually exoplanets, and that's a key element in this story.
I study atmospheres of exoplanets. I'm actually at an exoplanet conference right now, and we're studying demographics of exoplanets, how many of them there are, and how many form at what masses. But I'm going to a conference next week, which is on what's in their atmosphere. And for that, the thing that I thought was awesome in this film, it's not a spoiler. It's a visual effects thing that they did. They tried to show you what this one world, they called it Adrian. It's one of the planets in this system they're visiting, what it might look like as they're orbiting around. And they made it really dynamic. They gave it an aurora. They made the clouds really interesting. They put all these vortexes in the upper atmosphere. It looks like a gas giant-y planet, so they don't go down and land on it. I think it's gorgeous. It's like really gorgeous. And I think it's totally inspired by images that we've gotten from Jupiter by this NASA mission called Juno. And it was showing just cloud layer after cloud layer and just tiny spiral structures in the atmosphere that represented these storms that were raging.
These astrophage that are afflicting Sol, the Earth's sun, they're eating up the energy from the sun. They're dimming it, and they are spreading like a plague, star to star. Like the local neighborhood stars, they're having the same issue that Sol is. That's something that they kind of use to solve some puzzles and figure out where to go next to take on the problem. But this is what you study. So what did you take away from that?
So the other thing that I study as an astronomer is the solar neighborhood. I am all about the map of the nearest systems to the sun. And I actually think that that's a big component to this story. In the movie, less, but in the book. The point is the entire nearby solar neighborhood. And they didn't tell you the volume, but it looks like it went out to like 60, 70 light years. That volume of objects is all infected. And so fun fact, there's roughly 3,600 objects within 60 light years of the sun. If every single one of those objects, which include some of the most exciting stars in the sky, Sirius, Vega, if they were dimming, and they'd been dimming for a while.
So if there were astrophage, microscopic organisms traveling star to star, going from hot thing to hot thing, using up energy and dimming the stars, this is not something that people on Earth would have ignored or not noticed?
No way astronomers would not have noticed. Plus, people are going to be mad at me for nitpicking on this stuff, but they tell you
What we're here for.
They tell you in the book what object infected the sun. And I've studied that object in detail. No way we could be infected by this. This object is called WISE 0855. It doesn't have a fancy name because it was only discovered about 12 years ago or so. It is a very, very cold not star.
Oh, you're saying that was not a tasty star.
No,
There's no way.
Not a tasty star. A very, very, very cold object. The coldest compact object that we've ever discovered outside the solar system. And it's maybe like 10 to 15 Jupiter masses. It's low mass. And I've studied that object for its totally weird clouds. It would be just as feasible for it to be the Venus in this situation. Because what the astrophage have been doing is leaving the sun, going to Venus, eating the carbon dioxide. And we just studied it with JWST 0855. And it's got a lot of carbon dioxide. But then they'd have no star to hurry off to. So we didn't love that.
That's okay. I'm going to probably see the movie just because I want to see how much of the science made it across that translation. I really did like the relationship between the main human character and the main alien character. That's the buddy part that you emphasize right at the beginning. That's what gets me the most. Yes, I like the science. Yes, I like outer space and biology. But I also love this dynamic between the two of them.
When I walked out of it, I was like, that was a rom-com. I said it to my sisters later. I was like, that was a rom-com, but it's not like romance. And that's why I say it's a buddy film. This movie takes you on an emotional arc. It's really because of watching these two beings get along. It's really funny. I do think I wasn't getting as much humor out of the book, but it was there. But the movie's really funny. Like, they do give the character of Rocky this awesome personality. So you're going to like it. I also saw some interviews with Ryan Gosling, who plays the astronaut in this. And I think he was a producer on the film. And part of why he wanted it made is because that relationship between Rocky and Ryland Grace, it speaks to what it might be like. You get to know somebody and you're doing the same thing as just the two of you in the universe. It's all you know.
I want to touch on the main character in the book, Ryland Grace. He's the astronaut who used to be at one point a middle school science teacher. This is Ryan Gosling's character in the movie. In the book, Grace is very pedantic. You know, he's going to explain to you how to do math step by step for calculation or all the different kind of science behind the procedures that he's doing. It's a little bit much, I guess, in the book, but to tell you the truth, that's a character that you run into in the scientific community all the time. So I'm not really dismissing this as something that is not real, and I enjoy that kind of interaction typically. But do you feel like this characteristic of the astronaut was preserved in the movie?
No, I actually know what you're talking about in the book. And I thought I heard Andy Weir's voice when I was reading the book in that, not as much the character doing it, but that does not come through at all from my perspective in watching the movie. That I think Grace is fine as a character, but he's not explaining anything really to you about what's going on, because there's a lot of inner monologue in the book and there isn't in the movie. It just relies much more on how he starts interacting with Rocky. So there is a lot of MacGyvering that's going on, and it's collaborative between the two of them. I will say the one thing about Ryland Grace's character, and this is a book and movie thing, they made such a big deal. The only reason he got invited into the Hail Mary project is because he wrote this paper where he wanted to say that life didn't have to be H2O based. Everybody and their brother knows in the scientific community that we only search for H2O based life forms because that's what we are and that's what we have here. And nobody's dismissive of the concept. I mean, it's harder to have that happen. And then it sounded like he was a real, like, not so great colleague in science because he gets kicked out of the science community because he accosted somebody at a conference, which is totally what happens. But that's usually a disgruntled scientist, not the genius scientist.
No, I get those emails. Everybody gets those from physicists telling me about this.
Yes.
That's a good point. I guess I'm not surprised that a Hollywood movie would rescue this character and make sure that he was appealing widely.
Totally. He came off as adorable, heartwarming, very funny. And I think that's partly that's how Ryan Gosling plays things. He's a very funny guy and somebody that you could relate to. And I think the character in the book, with all the over-explaining, is not as relatable.
Any final thoughts we should touch on? It sounds like you like the movie.
I'm definitely going to go see it again because
oh, wow,
it's a good sci-fi adventure. Like, there's a lot of sci-fi adventures where the alien is evil and against us. You know, the movie The Alien or the movie The Blob from the 1980s, which isn't so dissimilar because it is as The Blob. And the astrophage in this,
incomprehensible, unknowable, dangerous.
But in this case, the astrophage, whatever they are, is some agnostic single cell microorganism that's just kind of existing. And in its existence, it's taking all this energy away from objects that support the life that we are. So it's looking at this balance of the universe. It's a little out there, but I liked that the alien wasn't, aliens in this are awesome because Rocky is awesome. But the other alien is the astrophage, the microorganism that's moving around.
Not so awesome.
Yeah.
All right, Jackie, thanks so much for talking with me. I'm going to go see the movie.
Great.
Jackie Fairdy is an astrophysicist and associate curator in the Department of Astrophysics at the American Museum of Natural History. You can find a link to her review at science.org/podcast. And that concludes this edition of the Science Podcast. If you have any comments or suggestions, write to us at sciencepodcast@aaas.org. To find us on podcasting apps, search for Science Magazine or listen on our website, science.org/podcast. This show was edited by me, Sarah Crespi, and Kevin McLean. We had production help from Podigy. Our music is by Jeffrey Cook and Wen Koi Wen. On behalf of Science and its publisher, AAAS, thanks for joining us.